Hey everyone, I noticed a lot of you who are watching and enjoying the content aren't subscribed yet. If you love spine-chilling stories, creepy encounters, and unexplained mysteries, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on the next terrifying upload. It really helps the channel grow and lets me keep bringing you more of the content you love. I don't know if I've ever been more confused in my life. I still think about it months later, and I can't even explain what happened to anyone without sounding like a total weirdo. I honestly don't know where to start, but I guess it all began with a simple swipe on Hinge. Yeah, the dating app. Don't even get me started on how sketchy dating apps are in general, but I was bored one night and figured, why not? What's the worst that could happen? I've been on Hinge off and on for a while. It's one of those apps where you're supposed to connect over shared interests and personality instead of just looks, which is honestly refreshing. So when I saw Daniel's profile, I thought, this guy could be the one. He checks all the boxes. We matched and we started talking. And the conversation? Well, it was incredible. We had so much in common. Books, music, movies, everything you could imagine. It felt so natural, like we were instantly on the same wavelength, which I rarely feel with people online. His profile picture was low-key but cute. He was in a park wearing a hoodie with a relaxed smile that made him seem approachable. Honestly, he looked like someone I could imagine grabbing coffee with on a lazy Sunday morning. His bio was pretty basic, nothing that stood out too much, but there was something about him that just felt right. Maybe it was that we seemed to like all the same obscure indie bands, or that we had similar taste in movies. After a few days of chatting, I gave him my number. It's not that I usually rush to take things off the app, but we'd been talking so much that it felt natural. Plus, he wasn't like every other guy I'd met online. He seemed different. He seemed like someone who could actually hold a conversation, not just talk about random superficial stuff like what I do for a living or where I've been traveling. We got into some deep conversations, which was honestly kind of refreshing, but then things started to get weird. It didn't happen all at once. At first, it was small things, like he would mention certain books I liked or songs I'd been listening to recently. But then he started getting more specific, like the time I told a friend that I hated wearing the color blue because it made me feel invisible. I'd only said that to one person, and it wasn't something I'd posted anywhere or even mentioned in passing to anyone else. But Daniel brought it up in a message. He was like, I think blue is a weird color. You said it once, remember? It's kind of like it makes you fade into the background. And I'm sitting there, completely freaked out. How did he know that? I never told him, but still I brushed it off. Maybe he'd overheard me talking about it to a friend, or maybe it was a weird coincidence. I mean, I didn't want to jump to conclusions, right? But that feeling didn't go away, and then things just got even stranger. One night, I mentioned in passing that I had just finished reading a book. I'd found it in a secondhand bookstore the week before, and I'd been reading it slowly in the evenings. It was a mystery novel, not something I'd mentioned to anyone else. But the next day, Daniel messaged me and started talking about the book like he had just read it himself. And not just a casual mention, he knew the plot, the characters, the whole thing. The weirdest part? I hadn't even posted about it online, and I definitely hadn't mentioned it to him before. It made me feel sick to my stomach. Still, I kept telling myself it was a coincidence. Maybe he'd seen me talk about it on social media, or maybe he'd guessed it somehow. But I didn't feel right. I couldn't explain it, but something in the pit of my stomach told me that this wasn't normal. Then came the real kicker. One day, he mentioned something so personal, it was almost impossible to ignore. I had this weird, recurring dream I'd been having for weeks. I'd posted about it on my private Snapchat, which I only used to talk to my closest friends. The dream itself was bizarre and unsettling, but what freaked me out wasn't the dream. It was the fact that Daniel described it in detail, as if he had been there with me. He talked about the specific details, the locations, the people in the dream, the exact feelings I had in it, and I never told him about any of it. How could he possibly know? That's when I finally decided to ask him. I was like, okay, this is getting weird. How do you know all this stuff about me? Things I've never told you, things I haven't even posted online. But when I confronted him, he just gave me this weird, calm response. He said something about how he just liked to remember the little things. He said it was a gift, that he liked to really understand people by remembering the smallest details. I wasn't convinced. I mean, what kind of gift was that? How could anyone remember things like that unless they'd been watching me closely? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I didn't know anything about him. His profile didn't even have a last name. He didn't share anything about his job or where he lived. I thought that was kind of strange, but again, I chalked it up to him being private. Everyone's got their reasons, right? But now it was starting to feel less like privacy and more like a cover-up. I started to look through my own social media accounts. Just out of curiosity, I tried to search for him, maybe to see if he was hiding his profile somewhere, but I couldn't find him. There was nothing. No Facebook, no Instagram, no LinkedIn, no trace of him, and that felt wrong. I mean, how could someone have no online presence at all, especially someone who was so aware of my life? That didn't add up. I was done. I couldn't take it anymore, so I blocked him. I thought that would be the end of it, but he didn't stop. He texted me from a different number, asking why I had blocked him. The messages were kind of pathetic, honestly. But the last one he sent, it still makes my blood run cold. He said, "Why did you block me? I thought we had something real." I didn't reply. I just kept blocking him over and over, but every time I did, he'd find another way to reach out. Eventually, I just deleted my number from my phone entirely and told my friends what had happened. They were all concerned, but no one could really offer a concrete explanation. There wasn't any rational explanation for it, honestly. It's been months now, but I still think about it. I still wonder how much Daniel really knew about me, how he was able to get so much information about me without me ever sharing it. I guess I'll never really know, and maybe that's what bothers me the most. He knew things about me that only someone who had been following me, watching me, would know. I can't shake the feeling that he was always there, in the background, waiting for the right moment to strike. I don't go on dating apps anymore, and I'm honestly terrified of the idea that someone like him could be out there again. It's like I've become hyper-aware of how much information we all put online, how easy it is for someone to dig through our lives if they know what to look for. Maybe I'll never have all the answers. Maybe it was just some weird coincidence after all. But deep down, I don't think so. Daniel knew things about me that no one should ever know. And now, every time I hear a ping on my phone, I can't help but wonder if he's still out there, watching. So, I don't even know where to begin with this. I don't tell anyone about it because it sounds insane, but I've been thinking about it constantly since it happened. I guess I should start by saying I met this guy on Hinge, and at first everything seemed pretty normal. His name was Tom. He was cute enough, and we hit it off right away. The conversation flowed easily, and we ended up chatting about everything from music to movies to travel. He seemed really nice and like genuinely interested in getting to know me, which was a nice change from the usual stuff I'd gotten used to on dating apps. After a couple of weeks of texting and talking, he invited me to dinner at his place. I'd never been to someone's house before on a first date, but it didn't seem weird at the time. We'd been talking about cooking, and he mentioned he loved making pasta, so I figured it would be casual, you know? So, I wasn't expecting anything fancy, but it sounded like a good, low-pressure way to get to know each other. When I got to his place, I was a little surprised. The house wasn't in a neighborhood I was familiar with, kind of tucked away on the outskirts of town. But it looked nice from the outside, big old 2-story house with a long driveway. It had this kind of charming, slightly old-school vibe to it, like it might have been built in the 90s or something. I didn't think too much of it, though. I mean, I'm not exactly picky about where people live, as long as it's safe, right? I rang the doorbell, and Tom answered almost immediately. He smiled and greeted me warmly, and we went inside. The first thing I noticed was how normal the place looked. Nothing too fancy, but nice. It didn't scream, "I'm renting this place for a few months," which was what he had told me over text. I figured it was just a temporary thing, but for some reason, the vibe of the house didn't match that at all. The living room was cozy, with soft, neutral-colored furniture. There was a fireplace with a couple of photos on the mantel. The weird part was, these weren't just generic pictures like the ones you'd buy at Target to fill up empty frames. These were photos of people. Some of them looked like they could be his family. Others seemed like friends. There were kids in a few of them, and I think one was of a woman who looked like she could be his mom or something. The thing is, none of these people looked like anyone I'd seen in his profile photos. And I mean, sure, I'm not always up to date on my dating app stalking, but I thought it was a little odd that he hadn't mentioned anyone in his family, not even once. I mean, it's pretty normal for people to talk about their parents or siblings after talking for weeks, right? But whatever. I didn't want to be weird about it, so I just smiled and complimented the house. Tom said he was renting it temporarily because his job had him traveling a lot, and this place was closer to where he worked. It made sense, but something about the way he said it felt like he was trying too hard to convince me. We had dinner, and it was honestly pretty nice. He made this homemade pasta with a rich tomato sauce, and we talked about random stuff, like our favorite TV shows and books. Everything was going fine until I noticed something even stranger. While we were talking, I saw a letter on the counter next to where we were sitting. It was addressed to someone named Cheryl Anderson, and the return address was from a law firm. My brain immediately picked up on it, but I didn't say anything out loud. I tried to brush it off, but I kept staring at it, wondering why it was sitting there like that. I mean, why would he just leave someone else's mail lying around like that? I asked Tom about it later when we were walking through the house. He explained that the place came with some old mail and he hadn't gotten around to sorting through it yet. But again, it just didn't sit right with me. The fact that the envelope was addressed to someone else, someone I had never heard of, felt a little odd. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right, but I was trying to be cool about it. I didn't want to come off as paranoid or rude, but the weirdest part happened when I was in the bathroom. I went to wash my hands and there, on the shelf in front of me, were more photos. This time, they were more personal, like close-up shots of people at what looked like family gatherings. There was one of a little girl blowing out birthday candles, and another one of a man holding a newborn. I didn't recognize any of them, but there was something about the whole situation that made me feel uneasy. These photos weren't just random. They looked like they were part of someone's life, someone's real life. I started feeling trapped in the house. Every time I turned a corner, it felt like I was finding more and more stuff that didn't belong. I didn't know how to explain it, but it was like I was walking around someone else's life, someone who wasn't Tom. I made an excuse to leave, and as soon as I did, I went home. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something, but I was too weirded out to figure out what exactly was going on. The next day, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I Googled the address of the house. I wasn't sure why, but something told me I needed to know more. The search results came up with a few different articles, one of which caught my eye. It was a local news story, and it was about a woman named Cheryl Anderson, the same name as the person on the letter. The article said she had been missing for several weeks. There was a photo of her in the article, and I froze when I saw it. She looked familiar. She was the woman in one of the photos I'd seen in the living room, the one who looked like she could be his mom. I kept reading. Apparently, Cheryl had been reported missing after she failed to show up for work. Her family had been searching for her, and the police were investigating, but they hadn't found any leads. The whole thing sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just a random name on a letter. It was someone who had actually disappeared. I couldn't stop thinking about the house. The more I pieced it together, the more I realized Tom's explanation about renting the place was probably a lie. I had been in the house of someone who had gone missing. But the worst part? Tom had never mentioned any of this. He'd never mentioned anything about the people in the photos, and he definitely didn't mention Cheryl. I texted him, but he never responded. I didn't go back to that house. I didn't want to find out anymore. I'm not sure if he had something to do with her disappearance or if he was just using her house for who knows what. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going back there. I never heard from him again. And honestly, I don't think I ever want to. A few weeks ago, I went on this date with a girl I met on Hinge. Her name was Emily. We hit it off right away. She was funny, smart, and cute. Everything seemed perfect. We grabbed dinner at this small Italian place downtown. The food was amazing. The conversation flowed easily. And honestly, I felt like I'd finally met someone I could vibe with. She was the kind of girl you just wanted to be around. By the end of the night, I was already thinking about how cool it would be to see her again. I gave her a hug goodbye, and we exchanged texts, agreeing to meet up again soon. No big deal, right? A couple of days later, the first package showed up. It was small, just a regular-sized envelope, and there was no return address, just my name written in neat handwriting. I opened it, and inside was a shirt I'd worn on our date. It was my favorite shirt, the one I'd gotten a few months ago, the one I always felt good in. I stared at it for a second, totally confused. I hadn't lost it. I hadn't even taken it off since the date. How did it get here? I figured it was some weird mistake. Maybe a friend was pranking me, or maybe it had just been sent to the wrong address, so I shrugged it off. But then, the next day, another package showed up. This one was bigger. It was a small box, and when I opened it, my heart skipped a beat. Inside, there was a napkin. The napkin from the restaurant where Emily and I ate. The one I had wiped my mouth with during dinner. It was folded carefully, like someone had taken time to make sure it stayed in one piece. There was no note, no explanation, just the napkin sitting in the box. I tried to convince myself it was a weird coincidence, but something about it felt off. At this point, I was starting to feel a little paranoid. I didn't know who would send me these things, and I had no idea how they got their hands on stuff that had been with me the whole night. But I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I texted Emily. I asked her if she had anything to do with it. Maybe she'd sent me a gift or something. She said she had no idea what I was talking about and even seemed a little confused. She said, "I haven't sent you anything. Are you sure it's not just a mix-up?" It didn't make any sense, but I wanted to believe her. Maybe I was overthinking it. But then things took a turn. The next package was the one that really freaked me out. I got home from work to find a small padded envelope on my doorstep. I didn't think much of it at first, but when I opened it, my blood ran cold. Inside was a lock of my hair. It was neatly wrapped in a piece of tissue paper, and it looked exactly like a strand from the top of my head. I don't even know how to describe the feeling that hit me when I saw it. It was like a punch to the gut. I didn't remember losing any hair, and I definitely didn't remember anyone taking it. I sat there for a while, holding the hair in my hand, trying to make sense of it. My mind was racing. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself it had to be some kind of sick joke. Maybe someone from work or a friend was messing with me, but the more I thought about it, the more paranoid I became. Who would do something like that? I went back to Emily's texts. I figured I'd just ask her again, straight up. I told her about the hair. I thought maybe she would have some explanation. Maybe she'd remember something from the night that I didn't. But again, she told me she had no idea what I was talking about. She said she didn't send it, and she was just as freaked out as I was. That made me even more uneasy. If she didn't send it, then who the hell did? Things didn't stop there. Over the next few days, I received more and more packages. Some were small, some were big, but every single one was strange in its own way. One contained a piece of the same shirt I wore on our date, but this time it was cut up into tiny strips. Another package had a receipt from the restaurant where we ate, and it was highlighted in yellow, like someone had taken time to mark the exact items we'd ordered. The more I got, the more I started to realize that someone was keeping track of every little thing I did that night. It was like I was being stalked, but by someone who knew everything about me. Not just my date, but everything from that night. Every item, every detail, down to the smallest things. I started locking my doors and windows, checking outside every time I heard a noise, but nothing made sense. There were no signs of anyone breaking in, no strange footprints or anything that seemed out of place. It was just these damn packages that kept showing up, one after the other. By this point, I was freaking out. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was losing my mind. Who would send me these things and why? Was it someone I knew? Was it Emily? But if it was her, why wouldn't she just tell me? Why would she pretend to have no idea what was going on? I started doing some digging. I went through my social media accounts, trying to find anything that could explain what was happening. And that's when I found it. There was a post from Emily, an old one, from before we met. It was a picture of her holding a box, but it wasn't just any box. It was a box filled with clothes, my clothes. The shirt I'd worn on our date, the shirt that had been in the first package. I felt sick. I didn't know what to think. Had Emily been stalking me this whole time? Did she have some twisted obsession with me? I didn't want to believe it, but it was the only explanation that made sense. I confronted her again, but this time I didn't hold back. I asked her flat out if she had anything to do with it, but once again, she denied everything. She said she had no idea what I was talking about, and that's when it hit me. Either she was lying, or someone else was doing this to mess with me. But why? What was the point? The packages stopped coming after that, and I haven't heard from Emily in weeks. I don't know what happened to her, or if she's involved in any way. I don't even know if I want to know. All I know is that I still can't shake the feeling that someone's out there, watching me, and I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again. Alright, this one's gonna sound crazy, but I swear to you it happened. I don't know if I should be laughing or still shaking from it, but this was one of those dates that went completely off the rails. And no, it wasn't some awkward dinner or some cheesy line. It was something way weirder, something I can't shake off. So, I matched with this girl, Lily, on Hinge. She seemed normal enough, you know, pretty cute, into some of the same stuff I liked, and we had a decent amount of things to talk about. After chatting for a while, she suggested we meet up. I wasn't super picky about where we went, so I was cool with whatever. She suggested a low-key dinner, but then changed it last minute to a gathering with some friends. She said it would be fun, and since I was open-minded, I figured, why not? Could be an interesting night. The meeting spot was weird though. It was way outside the city, like this remote cabin area near the woods. She sent me a pin for the place, and when I put it in my GPS, I realized it was about 40 minutes away. I thought it was strange at first, but she said it was this cool hidden spot, and I shouldn't worry. A little strange, but alright. I trust people, or at least I try to. I figured it'd be a good story to tell if it was weird, you know? So, I drive out there. The road's winding and narrow, and I'm thinking this feels more like a hiking spot than a dinner. No big deal. Maybe they're all about the outdoors. By the time I pull up, the sun's setting, and there's barely any light around. I'm literally in the middle of nowhere, but Lily's already standing by the entrance of this big, creepy-looking house. It looks ancient, like an old farmhouse, It's got that eerie vibe that makes you feel like something's just off. I get out of the car and walk over to her, thinking maybe she's just into weird, remote places. She greets me with a smile, but there's something in her eyes that feels a little distant. Like maybe she knows more than she's letting on. But whatever, I shrug it off. I didn't drive out here for nothing. The second I step inside the house, things start to feel weird. The place is huge, but the inside is dimly lit. It's got all this old furniture, old chairs, weird tapestries on the walls, and the air smells strange, like incense mixed with something I can't quite place. I'm thinking this is starting to look more like a cult or some secret society thing, but Lily just tells me it's a gathering of like-minded people. She tells me to make myself comfortable, and I go along with it. I mean, I'm already there, right? I can't exactly leave now. There are a few other people in the room, at least 6 or 7, and they're all dressed in the same weird, plain white robes. They don't look normal. The vibe is giving me major red flags, but Lily's acting totally casual about it, like it's no big deal. She introduces me to a couple of them, but they don't say much. They just smile a little too much and stare at me in this unsettling way. I'm trying to keep calm, thinking maybe it's just a quirky crowd, but deep down, I'm getting this gut feeling that I shouldn't be here. The air feels heavy, like everyone's waiting for something to happen, and that's when the chanting starts. It's this low hum at first, but it quickly builds into this weird rhythmic chant that doesn't sound like any language I recognize. I swear it felt like it was coming from everywhere in the room. Everyone starts joining in, even Lily, and I'm just standing there, feeling completely out of place. I keep glancing around, but no one seems bothered. Everyone's eyes are closed, swaying slowly like they're in some kind of trance. I'm starting to panic now, but I don't know what to do. I can't just walk out, right? I'm thinking maybe it's just some ritual or something. They're all clearly into this, and I don't want to make things worse. But as the chanting gets louder, my heart starts racing. The longer I stand there, the more I start to feel like I'm surrounded by people who are either all completely insane or doing something I shouldn't be witnessing. Then it happens. Lily turns to me with that same weird smile she had when I first walked in. She reaches out and grabs my arm, pulling me toward the group. At this point, I don't know if it's a game or if they're actually planning something crazy, but she whispers to me, "It's time for you to join us." And I swear in that moment I felt like I couldn't breathe. I try to pull away, but she's stronger than I expected. She pulls me closer to the circle. I'm getting this sinking feeling in my stomach that I've just walked straight into something I might not be able to walk out of. There's no way out now. It's like I'm trapped, and the chanting keeps getting louder, filling my ears with this pressure. I feel like I'm losing control, like I'm losing time. Everyone around me is still chanting, their voices blending into this eerie hum that feels so wrong. The weirdest part is that, for a moment, I start to feel like I'm part of it. It's like the air is thick with something pulling me in. The tension in the room is so thick it almost feels suffocating. But that snap, my brain finally catches up with my body. I yank my arm away from Lily and start backing up, my heart pounding like crazy. Everything inside me is telling me to run, and I don't care how weird I look. I turn around and bolt for the door, ignoring the sounds behind me. I hear the chanting getting louder as I reach the door, but I don't stop. I don't even look back. I tear out of there as fast as I can, running back to my car like my life depends on it. And honestly, it kind of did. I don't know how, but somehow I made it back to my car and peeled out of there. I didn't even know if I was being followed. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was behind me, watching me as I sped down the dark road. But I didn't care. I just wanted to get as far away as possible. Now, looking back on it, I don't know what to think. I haven't talked to Lily since. I've blocked her, deleted her messages, everything. I've tried to erase it from my mind, but every time I think about it, I feel that same panic from when she said those words, "It's time for you to join us." What the hell did she mean by that? What were they going to do to me? And why did I even go along with it in the first place? I don't know if I'll ever get answers, but I'll tell you one thing. I'm never going on a date that takes me to a place like that again. I still can't shake off what happened a few weeks ago. I don't even know if it was just a weird night or something a lot darker was going on. But I had a first date with this girl from Hinge, and it went way off course. I guess it started off like a regular date, but I'm telling you, it took one hell of a turn. Her name was Emily. She was cute, seemed chill, and we hit it off right away. She suggested we meet for drinks, but then, out of nowhere, she asked if I'd want to come over for dinner with her family instead. I thought that was a bit sudden, but she seemed so excited about it. She said her parents were super chill and that it would be a fun, casual thing. Honestly, I was a little nervous, but I didn't want to seem weird about it. I figured, hey, it's just dinner. What's the worst that could happen? When I got to her place, I noticed right away that the vibe was off. Emily's house was this big, older place, like one of those suburban houses that looks like it's been around forever, but not in a cute vintage way. It was more like it had been stuck in time. Everything about the place felt, I don't know, weird. There were no decorations on the walls, just empty frames and dusty old furniture. The whole place felt cold, even though it wasn't like physically cold. It was just empty. Emily greeted me at the door, smiling like nothing was wrong. I asked her about her family, and she said her parents were just really into family time, which I thought was sweet but maybe a little strange. She led me to the dining room, and that's when things really started to feel off. There they were. Emily's family was sitting around the table, and they all turned to look at me as I walked in. I'm not talking about a casual glance either. It was like they were waiting for me to show up. Every single one of them just staring. I smiled awkwardly and waved, but no one said anything. Not a word. Emily sat me down at the table, and the whole family stayed silent, staring. I was starting to feel like I was in some kind of movie, like I was the main character in a horror film, and they were all playing their parts a little too perfectly. I tried to start a conversation, but they didn't really engage. Emily's dad, this tall older guy with a thin mustache, didn't even acknowledge me. Her mom, who had this rigid smile on her face the whole time, just stared at me. Her brother, who looked about my age, was fiddling with his phone but not saying anything either. It wasn't like they were rude or anything. They were just silent and still. Like, not even the usual family dinner chatter was happening. They didn't ask how my day was. They didn't talk about anything that felt normal. They just ate and watched me. I kept trying to make small talk, but it was like the words were floating in the air, unheard. At some point, I started feeling like I was losing my mind. Why was this so uncomfortable? Why wasn't anyone saying anything? Then, it happened. I was mid-conversation with Emily when I overheard something her mother said to her husband in a whisper, but loud enough for me to catch it. "She'll do nicely," her mother said. It wasn't the words themselves that freaked me out so much, but the tone. It was cold, calculating, and almost clinical, like she was talking about a piece of furniture or some other object, and the she was referring to wasn't Emily. It was me. I'm not sure why, but I instantly felt like everything in that room had suddenly shifted. Like, everything about this dinner that felt strange before made sense in a way I wasn't ready to accept. I tried to shake it off, but it was impossible. My stomach felt like it was in knots. The air felt heavier. I looked around the table, and for the first time, I realized that none of them were eating. Their plates were just there, perfectly still. It was like they were waiting for me to do something, and I had no idea what. Emily was still talking, but I was barely listening. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. Was this some kind of joke? Maybe they were just messing with me, or maybe I'd been invited to some weird cult dinner by accident. I mean, who says she'll do nicely about their guest? That was the moment I decided I had to get out of there. But as I started to stand up, Emily's dad, who had been silent this whole time, suddenly spoke. "You're not going anywhere." It was calm, measured, like he was asking me not to go out for a walk, but there was something so wrong about the way he said it. I froze. I had to get out. I could feel my chest tightening, my breath getting faster. The door was just a few feet away, but I felt like I couldn't move. Emily was still talking, but her voice was just a distant hum in my ears now. I couldn't take my eyes off her family. They were watching me again, all of them, like I was the main attraction. They were no longer just staring, they were waiting. "Sit back down," Emily's mom said. Her voice was low, but there was something in it that made my blood run cold. "Dinner isn't finished yet." I could feel the panic rising in my chest, and without thinking, I bolted. I didn't even look back. I don't know what I thought was going to happen if I stayed, but I wasn't willing to find out. I ran straight for the door and didn't stop until I was back in my car, driving as fast as I could away from that house. I haven't spoken to Emily since that night. I blocked her number, deleted the app, everything. I haven't even told anyone about what happened until now because honestly, I still don't know what the hell went on there. I don't know what they wanted from me, but I'm not going to stick around to find out. If you ever get a Hinge date and someone invites you to meet their family for dinner, just don't. Trust me on this one. Something about it doesn't sit right. I'm not even sure how to begin this, but it still freaks me out just thinking about it. You know those dates where everything seems great at first, and then something completely bizarre happens that makes you second-guess your entire life? Yeah, this is one of those stories. It all started with a normal match on Hinge. Her name was Sarah. Cute, funny, and from what I could tell, we clicked instantly. We talked for a few days before she asked if I wanted to grab dinner with her at this place downtown. It was a cozy little restaurant that looked pretty chill, and everything seemed normal. We met up, had a great time, and honestly, I thought it was one of the best first dates I'd had in a while. We laughed, shared a couple of inside jokes, and just vibed. By the end of the night, I felt like I was on cloud nine. I mean, she was cool, we had so much in common, and I definitely wanted to see her again. Fast forward to a few days later, and I start getting these packages delivered to my apartment. The first one was odd, but not in a crazy way. It was a small box, and when I opened it, there was a shirt in it. The shirt I had worn on the date. It was my favorite one, a simple black t-shirt, nothing too fancy. But how did she get it? I couldn't remember leaving it anywhere. I figured maybe she had grabbed it by accident when I was getting in her car, so I sent her a quick text asking if she had it. She responded almost immediately, "I have no idea what you're talking about." Okay, weird, but I let it slide. It was possible someone else had sent it, right? Maybe it was a mix-up with another package or something. The next day, another package showed up at my door. This time, it was a napkin from the restaurant we had eaten at. It had a little smudge on it, probably from when we were talking, but it was definitely from that night. The thing that made me pause was that it was folded in a specific way, like she'd kept it on purpose. I texted her again, trying to keep it casual. "Hey, got a napkin from the restaurant. Did you maybe grab it without thinking?" She responded, "You're being weird. I didn't touch anything. Maybe you're just forgetful?" Okay, now I'm starting to feel like something's off. But I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I figured it was just some coincidence. But then, things got way worse. The third package arrived, and this one had me freaked out. Inside was a small envelope, and when I opened it, there was a lock of hair. My hair. I could tell because it was a few strands from the back of my head, the same spot where I'd gotten a trim a few weeks ago. But here's the thing. I didn't remember losing any hair, and I definitely didn't remember anyone cutting it or touching it. My heart was racing as I stared at the tiny bundle of hair. How the hell did this person get it? I called her this time. I had to know what was going on. I wasn't just going to sit back and wait for more creepy packages to show up. But when I asked her, she acted completely clueless. She sounded genuinely confused, saying she had no idea where it came from and that I was probably just playing some weird joke on her. I was furious. This wasn't funny anymore. After that call, I didn't hear from her for a few days. But the packages didn't stop. I was getting them almost every other day, random things that didn't make sense. A ticket stub from a concert I had gone to 2 months ago, a half-empty bottle of cologne I used to wear, and even a couple of random photos from my social media, photos I didn't remember ever sharing with anyone. It was driving me crazy. Whoever was sending this stuff clearly knew things about me that only a close friend or family member would know. But it wasn't just that. There was a feeling of unease, like they were watching me, keeping track of my every move. It felt invasive, like they had access to my entire life. But how and why? Finally, I had enough. I texted Sarah one last time. "Okay, something's going on here and it's freaking me out. I don't know how you're involved, but this is getting way too weird. I need answers." She replied, "I told you, I don't know what you're talking about. Stop texting me. I'll block you if you keep this up." I felt a wave of frustration wash over me, but I knew I wasn't going to get any answers from her. So I did the only thing I could think of. I reported it. I went to the police and told them about the strange packages. They took it seriously at first, but after a few weeks of looking into it, they told me there was nothing they could do. No one could figure out where the packages were coming from or who was sending them, and there was no clear evidence that Sarah was involved. At this point, I was starting to lose it. The packages kept coming, but nothing ever gave me a clue as to who was behind it. I'd wake up in the morning to find a package on my doorstep with something inside that made no sense. A receipt from a store I'd never been to, a ticket stub to a movie I'd watched with friends months ago, random objects from places I'd visited. It was like someone was collecting memories of my life, except I didn't know who they were or why they were doing it. And the worst part? Every time I tried to confront Sarah, she would insist that she had nothing to do with it. She'd block me on social media, then unblock me just to tell me to leave her alone. It was like she was playing a game, and I was the one losing. Eventually, the packages stopped. Just stopped. I haven't gotten anything in the mail for weeks now, and it feels like a weight has been lifted. But I still don't feel safe. I don't know who was behind it, or why they did it, but I can't shake the feeling that they're still watching. So, if you're reading this, just know if you get a package in the mail that has something personal in it, something that doesn't make sense, something that you can't explain, trust your gut. Don't just brush it off like I did. Because I'm telling you, it can escalate fast, and once it does, you might not be able to stop it. Okay, so this happened a few weeks ago, and I still can't explain it. It wasn't something crazy, but it was just off in a way I can't shake. Like, I still think about it and get that uneasy feeling. Here's what happened. I met this guy on Hinge, let's call him Ben. He seemed pretty normal. We talked for a couple of days and everything was fine, so we decided to go out for dinner. We hit it off pretty quickly. We went to this restaurant, had some laughs, and I thought, yeah, he's cool. I can definitely see us hanging out again. At the end of the night, he suggested I come over to his place, and I was like, why not? It was only a few blocks away, and I wasn't expecting anything weird. When we got there, the house was nice. I mean, it was your standard suburban house, nothing fancy, but definitely well kept. He led me inside, and we hung out, listened to music, and just talked for a few hours. We had a good time, and at some point, I must have left my scarf on the couch or something because, when I left, I didn't realize it was still there. I made my way home and didn't think anything of it until the next day. I woke up, realized I'd left my scarf, and figured I'd just swing by his place to grab it. No big deal, right? Well, here's where things get weird. I plugged the address he gave me into my phone, and I started heading over. I didn't live far, so I was there in about 10 minutes. But when I got to the address, I was stunned. The house wasn't there. Instead, there was this old, boarded-up building, like something straight out of a ghost movie. The windows were covered, and the door was chained shut. There was no sign of anyone living there. No lights, no cars parked outside. Just silence. I thought I had the wrong address, so I double-checked my phone. I definitely didn't. It said I was standing at the right spot. I took a few steps closer, trying to figure out what was going on. Maybe it was under renovation. Maybe he'd moved and I didn't know about it. But as I looked closer at the building, I noticed something else that freaked me out. The house I had visited the night before looked nothing like this place. That house was cozy and modern, and now I was staring at this decaying, abandoned shell of a building. It didn't even feel real, like something was off about the whole situation. I walked around the building, thinking maybe there was a back entrance or something, but nope, nothing. It was completely boarded up. I stood there for a few minutes, wondering if I was just losing my mind, but no, I couldn't have mistaken the address. I knew I'd been there the night before. I had just been there, talking to Ben and having a great time. So where the hell was that house? I started thinking maybe Ben had given me the wrong address by accident, or was just messing with me. Maybe he'd moved or was staying somewhere temporary. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but I was seriously creeped out. So I tried texting him to see if he could clarify. The message sent, but there was no reply. No biggie, maybe he was busy. But then hours passed, and I still didn't hear back from him. The weirdest part was that, even though I was standing right at the address on my phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, like I wasn't supposed to be there. It was almost like the house never existed. After not hearing from him all day, I figured I'd call it a loss and just go home. I left the place, and that night I checked my Hinge messages again, hoping for some kind of explanation, but there was nothing. Not a word from Ben. At this point, I was just confused, but I shrugged it off, telling myself it was just some weird mix-up. Maybe he got a new number or just wasn't interested anymore, so he didn't want to deal with it. But then the next day, I got a text from a random number. It was a picture of my scarf, my exact scarf, sitting on a table, with no message, just the photo. That freaked me out. I thought maybe Ben was trying to play some weird prank, but I had no idea how he could have gotten my number from somewhere else. I had blocked him on the app already, so I didn't even know how to explain it. I texted back asking who it was, but got no response. Later that day, I got another message, this time a video. It was of the same abandoned building I'd seen earlier, but this time the video was moving. The camera panned slowly up to the boarded-up windows, then zoomed in on the front door, which, for a split second, looked like it had been open, just for a flash. The door snapped shut, and the video ended. It felt like a message, but I couldn't make sense of it. Why would someone be sending me these pictures and videos? Was it Ben messing with me, or was it someone else entirely? At this point, I started wondering if I was being stalked, or if I had just wandered into some weird, unexplainable situation that I had no control over. A few days passed, and I didn't hear anything else. I did some searching online, trying to figure out if there was anything weird about the place I had gone to, but found nothing. No records of anyone living there, no property history. It was like the whole house had just vanished. I never got any closure on the situation, and I haven't heard from Ben since. I don't know what happened, but I haven't been able to get that image of the boarded-up house out of my mind. It was like the house existed one day, and then suddenly it was gone, like a dream or a memory that never happened. And no matter how much I try to forget about it, I can't stop thinking that there was something more to it. I never went back to the address. Part of me wants to, but I don't think I ever will. Something about it just doesn't feel right. Maybe it's better that way. I'll never know for sure. I met this guy on Hinge. His name was Chad. I know. Red flag right there. You're probably thinking, why did you even go out with him? But hear me out. At first, everything seemed perfect. He was charming, funny, and seemed like he had his life together. His profile was great. He had these pictures of him traveling, hiking, and with his dog. I love dogs, so automatic points. He had a good job in marketing and was really into art and photography. Honestly, he ticked all the boxes, and I was looking forward to meeting him. The messages at first were light and casual, nothing weird, just getting to know each other. But then, I started noticing something strange. Every time we talked, the details of his life shifted a little. At first, I thought it was just my bad memory, but then I started keeping track. One night, he mentioned his job. The first time, he said he worked at some big ad agency, creating campaigns for international brands. Cool, right? Then, the next time we talked, it was something completely different. He said he worked for a startup doing web development, something about managing social media. It wasn't even the same industry anymore. I didn't think too much about it at first. Maybe he just wasn't clear about his job, or maybe he was in between positions and hadn't updated his profile. I let it slide, but I started getting more cautious. The more we talked, the more little things changed. The town he was from, first it was one place, then a different one. The number of siblings he had, one week it was 2, then the next week it was 3. It was all subtle stuff, but it was starting to bug me. I thought, maybe he just had a bad memory. Maybe he was trying to impress me with some of the stuff he'd said, and when he realized he couldn't keep up, he just made up something else. I wasn't sure, but it felt off. Then came the date. By this point, I had gotten to know him pretty well, or at least I thought I had. We made plans for dinner at this cute little Italian restaurant near my place. I remember walking in and feeling a little excited. Maybe this would be the night I found someone I actually clicked with. He was already sitting at the table when I arrived, smiling that smile that had been driving me crazy over the past few days. The dinner went well at first. We talked about the usual stuff, what we did for fun, favorite movies, travel plans, the usual first date stuff. But as the night went on, things started to get a little weird. At one point, I casually mentioned that I'd been working on some freelance writing projects in my spare time. I hadn't shared that with him before, but Chad immediately jumped in and mentioned a specific project I'd been working on, one I'd never talked about in detail. I didn't even tell him I was working on that project. I was taken aback and asked him how he knew about it. He just laughed it off and said something like, "You're very talented. I pay attention to these things." I tried to let it go, but now it was officially creeping me out. How did he know? I never shared anything like that with him. There was no way he could have guessed. But, like a fool, I didn't press it. Instead, I just changed the subject, but it stuck in my head the whole time. Then, things got even weirder. Chad started casually dropping details about my personal life, things I never shared with him. He mentioned my childhood best friend by name and the nickname I used to call her. He brought up a trip I'd taken last summer with some friends, even though I never posted about it on social media. My stomach twisted. I was suddenly sitting there, listening to him recount parts of my life that no one but the people closest to me would know about. I didn't know if I should confront him right there or if I should just excuse myself and leave. My heart was pounding and my mind was racing. But I stayed calm and tried to brush it off as best I could, thinking maybe he just overheard me talking about these things in passing. But then, after dessert, he leaned back in his chair and gave me this strange look, like he knew something I didn't. He smirked, and that's when he said something that made my blood run cold. He said, "It's just research for our future." That sentence just echoed in my head. I laughed it off nervously, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized how messed up it sounded. What kind of research is he talking about? Research for a future we don't even have? How could he know this much about me without me ever sharing it? I left the restaurant in a daze, my mind spinning. I wasn't sure if I was overreacting, but everything about the night had felt off. The changing stories, the knowledge of things I never mentioned, none of it made sense. For the next couple of days, I couldn't stop thinking about what happened. I tried to rationalize it, like maybe he had hacked my social media or overheard me talking about things with mutual friends. But that didn't explain the details he knew that I hadn't shared anywhere. It didn't explain the feeling I had that he was stalking me or building a profile on me. I tried texting him after the date, hoping to get some clarity, but he didn't respond. I wasn't sure if he was just playing games or if he really was as creepy as he seemed. I thought maybe I'd send him one last message asking for an explanation, but then I realized I couldn't trust anything he said anymore. In the end, I deleted my Hinge profile. I blocked him and I decided to let it go. It wasn't worth it. But to this day, I can't shake the feeling that he knew way too much about me for comfort. I've never heard from Chad again. I don't think I ever will, and that's probably for the best, because I'm not sure I even want to know what he meant by research for our future. But I'll tell you this, I'll never look at dating apps the same way again. Who knows what people are really up to when they're behind a screen? I'll never forget the date I went on with that guy from Hinge. It started out totally normal, well, as normal as a first date can get. But it ended up being one of the most bizarre and unsettling experiences of my life. His name was Greg, and his profile was like most others. Decent photos, a few standard details about what he did for work, some hobbies. He was charming enough, with a funny sense of humor, but there was something off about him. Nothing I could put my finger on at first, but looking back I can see the red flags now. He was really into slang, but not the slang I was used to hearing. I'm talking about words like groovy and far out and cool beans. It was like he was straight out of a time capsule from the 90s. At first I thought it was kind of quirky. Maybe he was just being goofy, trying to sound retro or something. But after a while, I started to wonder if maybe he was just really stuck in the past. When we met for dinner, he was dressed in a way that looked kind of old-fashioned, like he was going for a vintage vibe or something. I didn't really think much of it, since we were at a casual place, and he seemed like a cool guy to hang out with. We chatted for a while about normal things, where we grew up, what we like to do for fun, that kind of stuff. But then he started asking these really strange, specific questions. He asked me what year I thought self-driving cars became mainstream. At first, I thought it was a random topic, so I gave him a simple answer, like 2030 or something. He didn't seem satisfied with that, though, and kept pressing for more details. So you think they'll really be common by? What's the year when they'll make it legal to drive them everywhere? He asked. It was like he was genuinely curious, but the way he asked felt weird. Like he already knew the answer, was just checking to see if I'd say the right thing. Then, out of nowhere, he asked about something that really threw me off. He wanted to know what year the internet became mainstream. He was using terms like dial-up and modem, and it felt like we were talking about something that happened decades ago. I mean, it was just strange, especially since we were sitting in a restaurant talking about something so random. The more he asked, the more I felt like I was talking to someone who wasn't entirely in the present. But again, I figured he was just being odd for the sake of conversation, or maybe trying to make things more interesting. After dinner, he walked me to my car, and we said our goodbyes. He seemed perfectly normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He had this old-school charm, almost like he was trying to act like he came from another time. When I got home, I thought about the night for a while, but eventually I shrugged it off. Maybe he was just one of those guys who like to play around with outdated slang. It wasn't that weird, right? But then, the weirdest thing happened. The next day, I went to check my Hinge messages to see if Greg had messaged me. I hadn't heard from him after the date, so I was curious. But when I went to his profile, it was completely gone. Not like he'd unmatched me or anything, it was just gone. Like he'd never existed. I thought maybe he deleted his account, but that didn't make sense. Why would he do that after our date? We had a good time, or at least I thought we did. I sat there for a minute, staring at the empty space where his profile used to be, and a strange feeling started to creep over me. I couldn't stop thinking about the weird questions he asked, how he seemed so fixated on the past, and how outdated everything about him felt. I started Googling his name, just to see if maybe he had another social media account, or if there was some other way to get in touch with him, and that's when I found it. An obituary. The obituary was from 1994. It was for a man named Greg Harrison, exactly the same name as the guy I'd just gone on a date with. The obituary said he had passed away in a car accident at the age of, which would have made him at the time of his death about my age. The date of death was listed as August 1994. I couldn't believe it. My heart started racing as I read the details of the obituary over and over. How could this be possible? How was this the same person I had just spent the evening with? The dates didn't make sense. This guy had been dead for over 25 years. But I remembered his face so clearly, his smile, his voice, his mannerisms. I wasn't imagining it. He looked just like the guy in the obituary. My mind was spinning. I tried to tell myself there had to be some mistake, that maybe it was a coincidence. Or maybe someone with the same name had died years ago. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. There was no way a random person would have the same name, the same age, and the same appearance as the guy I'd just met. I don't know what to make of it, and I still haven't figured it out. I haven't gone back to Hinge, and I haven't searched for any more information about the guy. I don't know if he was some kind of ghost, or if I experienced some kind of glitch in reality. But I can't stop thinking about it. Every time I close my eyes, I can picture his face, and every time I look at my phone, I'm reminded of how quickly his profile just vanished. It's been a few weeks now, and I still haven't heard from him, and part of me wonders if I ever will. I don't know what happened, and honestly, I'm too freaked out to even try to figure it out. But I'll never forget the man who vanished from my life and from the world before I even knew who he really was. At first, everything seemed so normal. We were just two people from Hinge meeting for a date. Simple, right? Well, that's how it was supposed to be. But in the end, it became something I can't unsee, something that still messes with me every time I think about it. It all started with her, Mia. Her profile was pretty standard at first glance. She liked hiking, coffee, and movies. Nothing too out of the ordinary. We had some light conversation, mostly about stuff we had in common, and eventually she asked if I wanted to come over for a small get-together at her house. No big deal, right? She told me there'd be a few friends over, just a casual thing. At first, I thought it was a little soon for a house party vibe, but I liked the sound of it. I figured it'd be fun, a chill night, meeting her friends, getting to know each other better. I showed up at her place around p.m. The house was on a quiet street, a nice little area, nothing too fancy. When I rang the doorbell, Mia opened the door with a smile, looking casual but cute. She was dressed in jeans and a hoodie, which gave me a more relaxed vibe about the whole thing. The sound of music could be heard faintly from inside, so I assumed the guests were already there, hanging out. But when I walked in, it hit me immediately that something wasn't quite right. The music was still playing, but the living room was empty. There were no other cars in the driveway, and the kitchen, which I could see through the open door, was eerily quiet. No friends, no drinks, no one else around. The strangest part? There were several plates of half-eaten food sitting on the dining table, along with cups and glasses that looked like they'd been recently used. It was like people had been there just moments ago. I felt a little off, confused, mostly. Where was everyone? Had they left without even saying goodbye? I looked at Mia, trying to make sense of the situation, but she didn't seem fazed at all. She gave a small shrug, like it was no big deal, and casually mentioned that everyone had left early. They just decided to head out, I guess, she said. But then she added something else that gave me the chills. But don't worry, you're staying. I didn't know what to say. It was weird, really weird. She led me to the living room and offered me a drink, which I politely accepted. But there was an uncomfortable tension hanging in the air, and I wasn't sure why. It felt like I had walked into a scene from a horror movie, where something was clearly off, but I couldn't put my finger on what exactly. Maybe it was the way Mia was acting, so casual, so easygoing, while everything around us screamed that something wasn't right. We talked for a little while, mostly about nothing important, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, shadows shifting or something that didn't belong. But when I turned my head, it was always just a trick of the light, nothing more. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The food. The plates were stacked, like they'd been eaten off of, but then left as if someone was coming back for them. It looked as though someone had just gotten up and left mid-meal. The food on the plates hadn't even begun to get cold, but I could tell it hadn't been touched in a while either. One of the cups on the table had a lipstick mark on it, but it didn't look like the kind of thing someone would just leave behind. It seemed too deliberate. As I sat there, I started to feel trapped, like the walls of the house were closing in on me. The music continued to play in the background, but it wasn't comforting anymore. It was like a soundtrack to something that didn't make sense. I couldn't shake the sensation that something was about to happen. The quiet wasn't helping either. Mia, who had seemed so friendly and normal earlier, was now acting weirdly distant. She barely made eye contact. She kept fiddling with her phone, her gaze drifting away whenever I tried to engage in conversation. I kept asking myself, where are the guests? Why did they leave so suddenly? But she wouldn't give me a clear answer. Every time I brought it up, she'd just brush it off, her smile staying fixed and unchanging. There was no urgency in her voice, no explanation. She just kept saying they left early, no big deal. But with each passing minute, it became more of a big deal to me. I tried to stand up to stretch my legs, but when I walked past the table, I saw something that made me freeze in my tracks. There, in the corner of the room, was a small door leading down to what I assumed was the basement. The door was cracked open just a bit, and as I peered into the dimly lit space, I thought I saw movement down there. I couldn't be sure, but it was enough to make my heart race. The feeling of dread grew even stronger. I knew I needed to leave. I just didn't know how to make it out without causing some kind of scene. The door was still slightly ajar, and the air in the room felt thick with something I couldn't name. It was like the walls themselves were watching me. waiting for me to make the wrong move. I kept my eye on Mia as she sat across from me, but her gaze was distant, focused on her phone. It was like she didn't care that I was about to bolt. Maybe she knew something I didn't, or maybe it didn't matter to her whether I stayed or not. I don't know how much longer I would have lasted in that house, but at that moment, I knew one thing: I wasn't going to stick around to find out. I stood up quickly, telling Mia I needed to get going, but she didn't stop me. She didn't try to persuade me to stay. Instead, she just looked at me with that same calm smile, as though my leaving didn't faze her in the slightest. As I left, I could have sworn I heard footsteps behind me, faint and almost imperceptible. But when I looked back, the house was still silent. I didn't look back again as I got in my car, slamming the door and driving off as quickly as I could. I still haven't been able to forget that night. Every time I pass that street, I can't help but feel a twinge of unease. What happened to the guests? Why did they leave so suddenly? And why did Mia act like it was no big deal that I was the only one left? I don't think I'll ever know the answers, but I do know one thing: I won't be trusting a small get-together anytime soon.